Welcome. I'm Catherine Hadro, and this is EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. A global perspective. A new report reveals just how extreme U.S. abortion laws are compared to the rest of the world. Hear from two pro-life experts as we take a deep dive into the study and its significance as the Supreme Court prepares to take up Mississippi's pro-life law. Bombshell revelations. The former president of Planned Parenthood releases a new book detailing her abrupt departure. Hear Dr. Leana Wen's troubling claims and what she says she was instructed to say in every media interview. A fight for conscience rights. The Department of Justice drops a lawsuit involving a Catholic nurse who says she was forced to violate her conscience and participate in an abortion. We break down the DOJ's decision and the concerning case. A new study reveals an overwhelming majority of European nations limit elective abortions prior to 15 weeks gestation. This comes as the Supreme Court prepares to take up Mississippi's abortion law this fall, which limits abortion at 15 weeks. The new comprehensive analysis from the Charlotte Lozier Institute finds that 47 out of 50 European nations limit elective abortion prior to 15 weeks. 0 out of 50 U.S. states have currently enforceable limits on abortion at 15 weeks. The study also finds that no European nations allow elective abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy, which is currently permitted in several U.S. states. The U.S. Supreme Court this fall will hear oral arguments in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization over the constitutionality on abortion prior to a child's viability. The case was prompted by a pro-life Mississippi law which protects the life of an unborn child starting at 15 weeks gestation. Joining us now is Chuck Donovan, president of the Charlotte Lozier Institute, and the recently engaged Mallory Quigley, vice president of communications for the Susan B. Anthony list. It is great to welcome you both here. Chuck, I want to start with you. Break this down for us. What were the main findings of this recent Charlotte Lozier Institute report?
Well, Catherine, we compared the United States, which has 50 states, of course, and 50 different laws, but we also have Roe v. Wade, which pretty much allows elective abortion up until birth. And European nations have not followed that course, generally speaking. We looked at 50 countries, a minimum of 1 million population, and the conclusion is pretty stark. 47 of the 50 would be classified as more conservative, more protective of the unborn than the United States, and certainly Mississippi. Even Mississippi's 15-week limit would be fairly liberal in New York. In Europe.
Right, it really does reveal that Mississippi's abortion ban at 15 weeks is more in line with European and global norms. Chuck, what is your goal in releasing this ahead of the Supreme Court hearing on Mississippi's law? Is it ultimately to influence the justices? What's your hope here?
Well, we like the justices who sometimes, at least the liberal members of the court, like to hail European law as being more advanced than the United States and just be square with it on human rights questions. But when it comes to the human rights of the unborn, we're radical. We're the radical country, and we'd like them at least to have a sense that by moving the limit back, we'd like to see, of course, Roe v. Wade be reversed, but by moving it back, the court would be doing a very mainstream thing by international standards.
And that goes against all the abortion industry's messaging on this, of course. Mallory, 79 pro-life women and state legislators joined the Susan B. Anthony list on an amicus brief filed last week, urging the Supreme Court to uphold Mississippi's 15-week abortion limit. Can you explain what is an amicus brief exactly, and what is your group's message to the High Court?
Yes, so an amicus brief means friend of the court brief. These are, anyone can submit one if you have an interest in the case at hand. And so our amicus brief, which was signed on to by those pro-life women legislators you mentioned, explains the history of women's representation across state legislative bodies and in the federal legislature. When the Supreme Court decided Roe versus Wade in 1973, it was 7 unelected men who made that decision and instigated abortion on demand for the entire nation. Since then, women have a much larger representation in state legislatures, as elected representatives in the federal legislature. So, and there's women on both sides of this issue. So our message to the court is, this is an issue that belongs in the legislative branch of government. Let lawmakers in civil discourse, in the process established by the founders, pass laws that represent the people that live in the states, and stop being so paternalistic.
That makes sense. I mean, so much has changed since the Roe v. Wade decision in 1973. And Chuck, I understand the Charlotte Lozier Institute also submitted an amicus brief. What was your message to the court?
Well, we're focused on science and statistics for life. And you're right, things have changed dramatically. What we focus on with the court is the advances in science, in perinatal medicine, in protecting the child in the womb, being able to do testing, to do fetal surgery, to treat twin syndrome, even at the 15-week mark, which is what Mississippi holds as protection. And we had some incredible testimony from Maureen Kondik, an expert in neonatology, embryology, about the beginning of life. There's just no question the science supports that this is a living human being in the womb who can be a patient, be cured, and be cared for.
Absolutely. I mean, look how much ultrasound technology has advanced since Roe v. Wade.
It hardly existed in the early 1970s, and it certainly wasn't standard care. Now virtually everyone in the United States, you'll see it in advertising, you'll see it on your refrigerator. It's the first picture in the baby album. That's new. The court didn't have that kind of sensitivity to the unborn 50 years ago.
Absolutely. Mallory, from your perspective, how much is riding on this Supreme Court abortion case? What should the pro-life movement's expectations be? Put this into perspective for us.
Sure. Well, and I'd be curious about Chuck's opinion on this, but I don't think that it's out of line to say that this is the most significant abortion case that the court has taken up since Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 1992. This is going to be, we've had other major abortion cases in recent years, but this is the first time the court is going to be addressing that line, which is currently non-existent, of where we might limit abortion. We've talked about the health and safety standards for abortion facilities. We've talked about taxpayer funding of abortion, but this case is about, okay, at a certain point, we're going to say no to abortion. Previous cases on, for example, the partial birth abortion ban, that was about a procedure, not about a point in time where we're going to protect life. So the court could move on a variety of ways. They could uphold Mississippi's law. They could do that without overturning Roe versus Wade. Of course, the Mississippi Attorney General, Lynn Finch, has outright asked the court to change its jurisprudence and to undo the damage that's been done, the lives that have been lost in the ensuing years since Roe. So it's very important. We need everyone watching to pray that the justices will do the right thing.
Absolutely. Well, just to follow up on that, Chuck, what do you think? Put this Supreme Court case into perspective for us. You've been a champion in the pro-life movement for years.
Well, I think it's the most significant case we've had actually since Roe itself. We've walked up to this point where the court now is willing to consider and voted to consider a case that involves actual limits that protect the baby. We're not talking about a technique of abortion. We're not talking about health standards. We're not talking about parental notice, important as those things are. Mississippi's law says we are going to protect this baby. The baby cannot be killed. And that question opened up by the Supreme Court really takes the whole territory before viability and says, what can the states do? And we're hopeful the court will say they can protect the unborn from conception.
It's great to hear that there is that hopefulness there. Mallory, the Supreme Court hearing is in the fall. Decision may come as late as June 2022, which is just months before midterms. Are you taking this Supreme Court case into account with your political strategy?
Absolutely, and I think the most important thing here is that many Americans, even pro-life Americans, even Supreme Court justices, perhaps don't realize that the United States has abortion on demand up until the moment of birth, that we're one of 7 countries that allows abortion on demand beyond the point the baby can feel pain. We stand with China and North Korea in this regard. And so this being a major opportunity to have a national conversation about abortion policy and where different candidates stand on this question is, I think, going to be very helpful going into the campaign season to draw people's opinions out on this, to educate Americans, and hopefully lead them to vote pro-life with those legislators then enacting pro-life laws.
It'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. And Chuck, I need to ask you about this. Last week, the House of Representatives passed spending bills without the Hyde Amendment. Every House Democrat voted against Hyde. You've done a lot of research into the Hyde Amendment and how it's saved so many lives. What's your reaction to this?
Well, it's an historic mistake if it happens. We still have considerable hope that the Senate, 50-50 split though it is, it may be able to resist this. It would be an historic change. It would increase the number of abortions. It would have disparate impact on minority babies in the United States who have a disproportionate number of abortions. But more importantly, it would put the United States government on the side of promoting an anti-life philosophy. So we've resisted it mightily. I'm personally optimistic that at the last moment, if we stick to our high principles, we'll be able to prevent this terrible legislation.
Absolutely. Senator Manchin has voiced his support for Hyde. So
Yes.
there is that hope there as well. Mallory Quigley and Chuck Donovan, thank you so much for coming here and for your expert analysis.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The former president of Planned Parenthood is opening up in a new way about her time as the head of the nation's largest abortion business. Dr. Leana Wen was ousted from Planned Parenthood in 2019, less than 1 year after being appointed president. Now, Dr. Wen, the first physician to head the abortion giant, is detailing her departure in her new book, Lifelines, A Doctor's Journey in the Fight for Public Health. The book contains some bombshells, including Wen's claim that she was pressured to use the word abortion in interviews. She also says colleagues encouraged her to use her own recent miscarriage as the reason for her departure. Our next guest knows the abortion industry inside and out. Sue Thayer is a former Planned Parenthood manager who today serves as Director of Outreach for the pro-life group 40 Days for Life. She joins us on Skype. Sue, welcome back. Dr. Leana Wen says in her recent book she was instructed to say the word abortion at every media interview. Is this in line with your own experience at Planned Parenthood?
It is. In the early years that I worked there, through the 90s and even the early 2000s, they talked about making abortion safe, legal, and rare. That was kind of their mantra. And now, of course, it's free, on demand, and without apology. So the fact that Dr. Wen's focus was really on public health, I knew that was going to be a conflict right away, and she keeps saying she was trying to make it seem less like a political activist organization and more like a mainstream medical center, and I knew they were not going to like that. So it came as no surprise to me when she had her very sudden departure through termination.
Absolutely. I think this all reveals just how abortion-centric Planned Parenthood truly is. Dr. Wen, in her book, also claims that Planned Parenthood colleagues wanted to spin her miscarriage for their own PR purposes. So what's your reaction to that revelation?
Not surprising at all. You know, she wrote, I think it was July of 2019, this heartfelt op-ed piece about her own miscarriage, and she said in there that her son had lost a little brother or sister, and the second I read that, I thought, uh-oh, she is not going to be there long, because Planned Parenthood does not refer to any unborn baby as a baby. You know, they call them everything else. And so when I saw that, I thought, she's going to probably be toast one way or another, because they just will not tolerate the humanity of it. And I couldn't help but think that Dr. Wen really did kind of connect a little bit with the pro-life side. Of course, her book, you know, she maintains that, you know, she's very pro-choice and all of that. I haven't read the entire book, but so it showing that mama's heart, I think, was probably the final straw for them.
Absolutely. And we should be clear, Dr. Wen is absolutely still very pro-abortion, but it's obvious she disagreed with Planned Parenthood's strategies. I was also surprised she was able to share as much as she did about Planned Parenthood. I mean, I would have thought her NDA was the size of a phone book. What were your thoughts when you heard she released a book earlier this year?
I was surprised. I just recently looked at her bio, and I noticed on there she does not even mention her time at Planned Parenthood as the CEO. Of course, she was only there 8 months, but I think she got a full taste of just how rabidly pro-abortion they are, and obviously she is too. But there are different levels of the craziness, I think, and their new CEO, Alexis McGill-Johnson, certainly is in line with what Planned Parenthood Federation of America would want.
Absolutely. Sue, as someone who has left the abortion industry, what is your advice to our viewers and to the pro-life movement about how we should best engage with people working in the abortion industry and those who have left it, like Dr. Leana Wen?
Pray. I think that's the best thing. Try to plant seeds in workers. If you're at a 40 Days for Life vigil, you're just out on the sidewalk praying and you have an opportunity to show kindness to a worker, whether it's just a smile or a wave. Those are all seeds planted. And I know sometimes when we work in the pro-life movement, we think it's not making any difference. We're not getting any headway. But, pray for Dr. Wen. Pray that her heart would be softened towards life, and imagine what a testimony that would be. I know personally from working there and how lost and misguided I was that no one is out of God's reach. So we know that every worker is a child of God. He loves them just like he loves all of us. And it's our job to just show the love of Jesus Christ, then leave the results to him. It may be 5 years after you have an interaction with someone on the sidewalk that it finally clicks, and maybe they'll leave. And that was part of the process along the way, the pebble in the shoe, so to speak, where they start thinking, maybe I shouldn't be here. Right. So all of our actions together make a huge difference, and God is orchestrating this whole big picture, and it's just such an honor to be a little tiny part of it. So we all have a job, and we just have to figure out what God wants us to do.
That is such a good reminder. We have to pray, and we can't judge what the outcome might be from that prayer. Sue Thayer with 40 Days for Life, thank you for all that you do, and thanks for taking the time to join us this week.
Thank you for having me anytime.
Thank you. Coming up, a cable news network smears pro-lifers in a discussion about abortion laws. I speak out next. Plus, the Department of Justice dismisses a lawsuit against a Vermont hospital accused of violating a Catholic nurse's conscience rights. What you need to know after this. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Hadro. MSNBC calls Justice Amy Coney Barrett a handmaid and smears pro-lifers. That is this week's Speak Out segment. MSNBC host Tiffany Cross of the show The Cross Connection recently led a discussion about the upcoming Supreme Court case on Mississippi's abortion law. The guests blasted pro-life laws, and then one of the panelists, Ellie Mistel, a correspondent for The Nation, portrayed pro-lifers as this.
We treat women like we're in Gilead already, right? After 26 weeks, we treat women like they're incubators with mouth parts.
That's right. He said pro-lifers treat women like incubators with mouth parts. The TV host Tiffany Cross then made this jab at Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett.
I mean, she kind of warned us, right? There's an actual real live handmaid on the Supreme Court saying this.
As we've been reporting, the Supreme Court will take up Mississippi's abortion law this fall, with a decision expected to come down in the summer of 2022. While I'm not necessarily surprised by what I hear from other cable news networks, I still want to speak out about this because these particular comments were deeply offensive and falsely portrayed people in the pro-life movement. The attack that pro-lifers treat women like they're incubators with mouth parts is especially misleading because it's not the pro-life movement that sees a woman for her parts. No, we see the whole picture, the whole gift of woman, and how that does include her fertility. It's an integrated gift of womanhood. It's people who expect women to turn on and off their fertility that see women as their parts. This same MSNBC discussion then referred to Justice Amy Coney Barrett as a real-life handmaid, which is a slap in the face to her hard work and success as a woman. If you think graduating law school at the top of your class, getting married, having 7 children, and then reaching the highest levels of the court to become the first woman on the Supreme Court who is a mother to school-aged children is a sign of an oppressive woman, then that's a warped sense of what oppression is. Fellow women should be celebrating this success. This MSNBC segment that smeared pro-lifers is just another reminder that abortion advocates are worried about pro-life strides, so their defense is to lie about what the pro-life movement is truly about. For this week's Pro-Life Focus, the battle for conscience rights. President Biden's Justice Department last week dismissed a lawsuit against a Vermont medical center alleging it forced a Catholic nurse to participate in an abortion she objected to on religious grounds. The lawsuit against the University of Vermont Medical Center was filed in December at the end of the Trump administration. But in a one-page notice filed last week, the Department of Justice announced it is dismissing the case. The DOJ gave no reason for its decision. The CEO of UVM Medical Center says they are pleased by the news. We first started following the case in 2019 when the Trump administration's Health and Human Services Department put the medical center on notice over the allegation. Here is what the Catholic nurse's lawyer told us at the time about her claim.
The doctor then turns to her and says, "Don't hate me." And she learns that this is an elective abortion. And so she did not know what she was going to be participating in until literally she was already in her scrubs, having to make that decision, the pressure, do I do this, the job, and of course this caused a lot of distress.
The nurse has since left the hospital, and she was previously filed a complaint with HHS's Office for Civil Rights. Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska issued a statement responding to the DOJ's dismissal of the case, saying, quote, "This isn't just a shocking failure by the Department of Justice. It's a slap in the face to basic conscience rights. The law protects healthcare providers from being forced to perform procedures they find morally objectionable, and the DOJ ought to see this case through." To discuss this case and the importance of conscience rights, we're now joined by Lewis Brown, the executive director of the Christ Medicus Foundation. Lewis is also a lawyer and previously served in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services from 2017 to 2019. Lewis, welcome. It's great to see you. This is a big case. When did you first become aware of this Catholic nurse's claims, and what is most troubling to you?
Sure. I first most likely learned about this when I was at HHS serving in the prior presidential administration, or maybe just not too long before that, but probably when I was there. What's most disturbing to me about this case is a few things. The first thing is that a major medical institution that receives public funding, University of Vermont Medical Center, had such a disregard for the nurse's conscience rights, her religious beliefs, and not just in this case, but the original notice of violation that HHS sent out suggests that this was happening in many different cases in that medical center, and that they had a policy of ultimately disregarding the conscience and religious freedom rights of medical professionals at their medical center at a major public institution. This is a problem not just in Vermont, but it's a problem across the country in the most pro-life states, but also in the states that are sadly pro-abortion.
That is so troubling. And Lewis, can you clarify for us, what rights do pro-life healthcare workers have? Do pro-life healthcare workers have the right to refuse to participate in an abortion if it goes against their conscience?
Sure. Under federal law, what we have is that generally healthcare workers, where they're working for a healthcare institution that's receiving federal funding, generally they are protected, they are defended from having to violate their conscience. They can submit a complaint at HHS. They may have state law protections as well. It just kind of depends. But generally, when you're talking about a healthcare institution that receives federal funding, they have their conscience rights protected. They are protected from filing a complaint. They're protected from being forced to violate their conscience.
I think we need to just share that far and wide so
Sure.
people know what their rights are. Okay, this lawsuit was dismissed by the Department of Justice, but is it your understanding, did the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Xavier Becerra, did he have a role in this as well?
Yeah, most likely he did. So what it looks like happened here is that HHS withdrew its notice of violation to the University of Vermont Medical Center over this case. That appears to, based on news reports, have happened in conjunction with the Department of Justice dismissing this case. And based on my experience at HHS, it's almost certain that Secretary Becerra was consultant and approved this decision.
That is deeply concerning, especially because he himself is Catholic, and this happened against a Catholic nurse.
Sure.
What does this DOJ dismissal signal to you, Lewis, about the future of pro-life healthcare workers, at least during this administration?
I think it signals a few things. I think first, it suggests what we feared and what many had said, myself included, for a long time. It's important that as Catholics, we support this administration when they're doing the right thing, but we oppose this administration's actions when they're doing the wrong thing. Here, it largely suggests that this administration is hostile to medical conscience and religious freedom in healthcare. It also suggests what we, I think, already knew, that they truly have a radical abortion agenda. It also suggests that they have no intention of enforcing meaningfully existing federal laws that protect the medical right of conscience and religious freedom in healthcare. I have seen just in the last 2 years, Catherine, a Catholic physician in Michigan who was forced out of her practice because of her pro-life beliefs. I have seen a Catholic surgeon in a very conservative state under pressure from his school's administration because of his traditional beliefs, his Catholic beliefs about human sexuality and his pro-life views. I am aware of a Catholic medical student who was pressured by her school's administration because of her views about life and her Catholic beliefs. And so this is happening across the country in America. We know that here they have a radical agenda when it comes to abortion, and they are not interested. They will refuse, this administration sadly, will refuse to enforce basic civil rights, the civil right of medical conscience, when it comes up against or conflicts with their radical pro-abortion agenda. That's the reality that we're in. This case is very important. It is important for the pro-life movement. It's important for pro-life healthcare. There's an effort right now to completely force out pro-life medical professionals and Catholic healthcare institutions out of healthcare altogether. This is the linchpin of the pro-life movement, in my opinion, and it's important that we come together to oppose it.
It's important we come together, and it's important we sound the alarm. Thank you, Lewis. You really are at the forefront of conscience rights. Lewis Brown with Christ Medicus Foundation. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that does it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Until next time, we'd love to hear from you. Find us on social media at EWTN Pro-Life on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're there. You can also send us a message by emailing prolifeweekly@ewtn.com. We love to hear from you. Remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.